How far can a lie be carried on, as today's story shows, quite long when it involves a family member? The worst is when this familial bond is abused for selfish purposes, for sometimes it destroys destinies down to their foundations. On May 10, 2003, Joey Fulgham failed to show up at the air show he was eager to attend. The following day was Mother's Day, another significant event he ignored, though he had always congratulated his loved ones and spent time with them before. After these two incidents, the relatives of the man realized something was wrong. His mother and sister went to his house and saw a horrifying sight. Joey lay face down on his bed with a huge hole in his head, obviously from a gunshot to the back of the head. The family immediately reported the gruesome discovery to the emergency services, 911. The police officers arrived at the scene and began investigating. They first spoke with the mother and sister of the deceased, who had discovered the body. They were very distraught but answered the questions quite appropriately. In their opinion, only his wife, Christy, with whom he had a complicated relationship, could have killed the man. Christy did not hide her affairs and dreamed of getting rid of her annoying husband. This led investigators to the main suspect, who was not at home. The police found Christy at her mother's house in the neighboring small town of Little Rock. When questioned, she acted as if she knew nothing about what had happened. When the investigators told her about the tragedy, she started crying and mourning the loss of her husband. The police found nothing suspicious in her behavior and continued to gather evidence. It was only later that the real case against Christy came to light. However, before she was arrested, she and her paternal half-brother voluntarily went to the police station in Starkville. In the sheriff's office, 27-year-old Christy told the police what had really happened. According to the young woman's confession, her 13-year-old half-brother Tyler was visiting the family home on the morning Joe was killed. There was a serious conflict between the couple during which her husband raised his hand against her. According to Christy, her brother was angry about his behavior and wanted to protect his sister. Of course, he was physically unable to deal with an adult man alone, so he thought of another way out. Tyler took a rifle and shot the sleeping man in the back of the head. At the same time, the investigators also questioned Tyler. They began talking to the boy without an adult or lawyer present, which was obviously a violation and later played a role in the case. The boy's mother was informed of the incident and immediately came to the station. Initially, the teenager denied being involved in the murder, but then his statement changed when his sister entered the room and gave a sign. The boy repeated his sister's story, but with new details. He confessed that he and Christy had sneaked into the bedroom in the early morning hours, pulled the trigger of the rifle, and shot their husband. This was a real shock to the mother when she heard the confession. She literally fell to her knees and cried. It was clear that the 13-year-old could not have committed the act alone, as the child simply did not have the strength to handle a weapon properly. According to the student's statement, he really could not pull the trigger himself and therefore needed his sister's help. In this way, the police obtained a confession, and the boy was considered the initiator of the act and his sister as an accomplice. According to Tyler, he had previously given his sister the murder weapon. It was an old family rifle of caliber .22, which Christy had asked for a few weeks before the act. The sister had been afraid of the big dog that constantly ran into the couple's garden and wanted to be armed to protect herself and the children. Tyler, of course, did not want Christy and her children to be injured, so he willingly handed over the shotgun. Still, the schoolboy complied with her request. He had always been very fond of animals and had even fed stray dogs. That's why he literally begged Christy not to kill the dog. She finally convinced the student that she would simply shoot into the air in case of danger from a dog, just to scare away the annoying animal. Tyler was convinced that the weapon would not work at all. In his opinion, it was a very old rifle that had been gathering dust in the attic for years. For over a year, he and his friends had tried to make it functional again because the weapon was damaged. He had never managed to repair the family heirloom, which the young man wanted to use for sport shooting, so he was sure it was not dangerous. On the eve of the act, a Friday, it was Tyler's sister who was supposed to pick him up from school. However, she was out with her lover, Keel, and so preoccupied with the new man that she forgot the time. She arrived a few hours late to pick up her brother, picked him up, and brought him to her house. After returning from school, the sister took Tyler to the garden to test the rifle. The young man's suspicions were confirmed in the backyard. Just a day before the murder, the rifle had not fired. Afterward, Christy stored the non-functioning weapon in the trunk of her car. The teenager knew it was there. Something about the student's story did not match his sister's version. He was confused about how they stood during the shooting and how they held the weapon. Despite his confession, the description of the murder seemed far-fetched, and several facts did not match the words of the young man. After the confession, the young man contacted the investigators a few days later. He wrote a retraction of his earlier statement. According to the student, he took the blame because he wanted to protect his half-sister. He believed that because of his age, he would not go to prison himself and therefore willingly took responsibility. As a result, he now faces a life sentence. The young man expressed a new version of the events. According to him, the 13-year-old Tyler was on his way to his father with his older half-sister on May 10, 2003. The night before, he had stayed at his sister's house. On Saturday morning, Tyler was woken early by his sister's alarm to get ready for the trip. The teenager got into Chrissy's car, and his sister asked him to wait with her daughter. They sat in the car for about 5 minutes. The young man was just tuning the radio when he heard a loud bang from inside the house. He still thought the rifle was in the trunk of the car, so he did not pay much attention to the noise. Christy had a cat that often knocked various objects down, so they broke. So, the student thought it was the same this time. Besides, Christy came out of the house as if nothing had happened, got into the car, and, according to Tyaz's statement, they drove away calmly. Only on the way back did the sister admit that she had killed Joey with the shotgun. The young man was shocked. Christy cried and pleaded with her brother to save her from the death penalty, whereupon he promised to take part of the blame, although he did not realize what punishment he would receive. Could Tyler really be the one who shot his sister's husband? To answer this question, the police officers had to take a closer look at the family's life. Tyler and CH went to the same school. She was much older and graduated earlier. As a student, Tyler was always a smart and hard-working child, kind, friendly, and quiet. Moreover, he was a sociable boy who easily found a common language with classmates and other people. He seemed to have a bright future ahead of him, as pure as his heart. Tyler's mother, Sharon, raised the child alone. The parents divorced early because the father showed aggression. The boy lost the opportunity to see him. This happened against the background of the man's abusive behavior, which had long oppressed his wife. Finally, Sharon's patience ran out, and she could no longer endure his behavior. The woman filed for divorce and received full custody of the child. To protect Tyler, she excluded contact with the biological father, even under the supervision of social workers. Tyler's paternal half-sister, Christy Fulg, knew that the boy still wanted to meet his father despite the mother's ban and the court order. He was still attached to the man and wanted to see him at least occasionally. To establish contact and spend time together, his half-sister, Christy, decided to help Tyler see his father against his mother's wishes. One day, she asked the young man if he wanted to spend the weekend in the house where his father lived. At that time, Christy was the only connection to his family. She herself was a very important person to the young man, whom he greatly appreciated and respected. The 13-year-old Tyler agreed. He was very excited about the weekend so that he could meet his father. At that time, the 27-year-old Christy was married. She lived with her husband, Joey, and their 3 children in their house. When Joey first met Christy, he was truly enchanted. She seemed the epitome of beauty and moral principles, a woman with so much intelligence. Christy was a pleasant person, beautiful in appearance, and perfect in her ability to use her natural charm. Yet all this later became the reason for a breakup. She turned out to be promiscuous and selfish, thinking only of herself and ignoring her spouse's feelings. Christy did not even hide particularly from him, knowing about her regular adventures, but turned a blind eye to everything. She preferred to start a family not to anger her parents, just to be like the others. At the same time, she began romances with various men under this guise. Joey sincerely loved Christy, but she was not interested in his feelings. Her husband was just a cover for her. The most astonishing secret in the young woman's life was the fact that she was loved by everyone around her: half-brother, husband, father, many lovers, but she did not really love anyone. Christy used people without having any qualms about it, and her ability to skillfully manipulate men helped her in this. As it turned out later, her loved ones suffered the most from this trait. Christy had a significant influence on her young brother, as repeatedly admitted by her family. Both had the same biological father. From a young age, she was very close to Tyler, which would bring him a cruel future. Of course, he had no idea of Chrissy's insidious plan at the time. The sister used Tyler's desire to meet his father to gain additional control over his mind and heart. She constantly asked her brother to lie to her husband and other friends so that she would not be caught in her intrigues. CHR also used Tyler to look after her and even to clean her house. Once, Christy tried to convince her brother that she would be a better guardian for him than his own mother, but Tyler was not deterred by these plans. He could not abandon his mother. In fact, Tyler's mother had long suspected before the events in question that Christy was mentally ill. She behaved like a manipulative person, became increasingly angry and aggressive, and snapped at relatives over trifles. All this happened spontaneously and could not be controlled. Naturally, her relatives long attributed this to stress or other usual reasons. Unfortunately, the reality was much worse. The young woman became angrier, and the culprit of all her problems was her loving husband, Joey. Nevertheless, her mother did not forbid Tyler to communicate with his sister. They were very close, and it seemed that despite her strange behavior, she posed no danger. Both involved in the murder were arrested and charged with murder, a crime punishable by death under Mississippi law. According to the judge's ruling, the young man was tried as an adult because of the severity of the crime. However, due to his young age, he could not be sentenced to death. Therefore, it was expected that the teenager would receive a life sentence without parole. At the same time, Christy faced the lethal injection. The trial against Tyler Edmonds began on July 20, 2004. It was a high-profile and widely watched case, for the main character of the brutal massacre was a 13-year-old student. The teenager was defended by one of the best lawyers in the state. He was convinced that his client's initial confession was a lie made under pressure from his older sister. The defense also believed that the confession had been coerced by police pressure. The child admitted that he had been very scared during his interrogation, especially since he was initially questioned without his mother and his lawyer, which constituted a violation. The only physical evidence in this case, apart from the bullet, were Christy's fingerprints on the porch and the motion detectors of the lamp. The lamps were turned off at the time of the murder, probably to avoid attracting the attention of the neighbors. Christy's fingerprints were also found on the weapon. The young man emphasized that he had only made the false confession to save his sister from the death penalty, and he believed that because of his age, he would get away with a mild punishment, However, when he realized that he could receive a real sentence, he became scared and refused to help his sister. After the judge's decision, however, only Tyler's confession, not the retraction of the student's statement during the trial, was presented by the prosecution. Moreover, the prosecution was represented by an expert who claimed he could determine from the nature of the injuries with certainty that the rifle had indeed been held by two people. As a result, the expert could not convincingly explain how he came to this conclusion. Despite the absurdity of this statement, the expert's words played an important role at the hearing. The jurors were shown a video of the young man's confession, and the statement of a respected expert with extensive experience as a forensic scientist was played. No further arguments were presented. The jurors deliberated for about 5 hours before reaching their decision. The defense was sure that the young man would be acquitted due to the weak evidence. Nevertheless, on July 24, 2004, a 15-year-old student was found guilty of murdering Joey Fulgham. The young man was sentenced to life imprisonment. After the verdict was announced, the defense immediately filed an appeal. He did not stop fighting for justice and tried to obtain a review of Tyler's case. Indeed, numerous errors in the work of the investigators were identified. The prosecution relied only on circumstantial evidence, and the most important evidence was the young man's own confession. However, his defense was sure that the confession had been coerced either by force or with the help of psychological tricks mastered by the interrogating officers. Since it was a minor, namely a schoolboy, the officers had more influence on the child who was left alone with them. Despite the efforts of his lawyer, the young man ended up in prison. Mississippi had very strict laws, making it extremely difficult to obtain an appeal for an already convicted offender. Nevertheless, the lawyer did not give up hope, nor did the people close to Tyler who knew him well. Most refused to believe that the young man could have committed such a cold-blooded murder. He had a good relationship with all family members, including Joey. He neither suffered from mental illness nor other disorders, and the young man had no motive for the murder at all. Christie's story sounded long-winded, and many were convinced that the student's conviction was the result of a miscarriage of justice and his confession the result of manipulation by his half-sister. The lawyer for the teenager was determined. The defender was aware that the only way to revise the verdict was to make it as public as possible. However, even then, the review would take years. Tyler's trial became the subject of public debate. The excitement about the trial was so great that even legislators intervened and wanted to revise the existing criminal law. Finally, in January 2007, a glimmer of hope emerged. The Supreme Court of Mississippi agreed to review Tyler's case. Finally, the defender managed to attract the attention of the court system. At that time, the teenager had already spent almost 4 years behind bars. The main problem was the statement of the expert who convinced everyone that two people were holding the rifle. In fact, he could not determine from the bullet's trajectory how many people were holding the rifle when the shot was fired. His statement was refuted by other experts and classified as biased. Afterward, the Mississippi prosecution was in a quandary, as it had no other evidence. The prosecution offered a deal, which would have made the case much easier and reduced the sentence. The young man might even have been released from prison directly, as he had already served a sufficient sentence. However, Tyler did not want freedom in this case, but basically to prove his innocence. Of course, there was a small risk that the young man could be found guilty again and the life sentence confirmed. Despite this possibility, the young man rejected the offer of the prosecution. He claimed he was innocent and did not want to take responsibility for someone else's crime. On October 28, 2008, Tyler's retrial began. His lawyer saw the case as a personal battle. In his opening statement, the lawyer emphasized that the 13-year-old boy had been charged as an adult criminal. Many mistakes had been made during the investigations. The police officers had not respected the child's rights during the interrogation. Moreover, the law enforcement authorities immediately focused on proving the student's guilt after the confession but did not even try to verify his statements. At the same time, there were significant discrepancies between the confession and the evidence, and the investigators recognized these inconsistencies. The authorities had only circumstantial evidence, some of which completely contradicted the young man's statements. To confirm his statements, the defender called the young man's sister, Christy Fulgham, to the stand, as he believed this was the best way to refute the prejudice. The defender believed that Tyler's sister would tell the truth, but this plan did not work out. On the advice of her lawyer, the sister refused to answer any questions. Although the expectations were not met, this behavior helped to clarify to the jurors who Christy really was and that she had something to hide. From the beginning, she pursued selfish goals. The fate of her half-brother, whom she wanted to blame despite his loyalty and young age, was completely indifferent to her. Unlike Tyler, Christy actually had a valid motive for murder. Joey had taken out a life insurance policy for $300,000, which could have been another reason to get rid of her annoying husband. In the couple's circle of acquaintances, they found witnesses who confirmed the widow's selfish intentions. Just before the murder, she had tried to find out how much money she would receive in the event of her husband's death. This was not possible, however, as Joey had written a confidentiality statement. But Christy was still confident that it was a good deal and that she would be the beneficiary of the payout. Christy's father appeared in court and told how his daughter had asked him to give her a gun and help her kill her husband, offering as a reward to buy her father a new Cadell from the insurance payout she would receive. The man, however, steadfastly refused to participate in the crime and advised his daughter to divorce her husband if she did not like him. Christy sharply countered that she would then not receive the insurance and would have to share the assets. This was, of course, not favorable for her. Another reason to get rid of her husband was that he had found out that the youngest child was not his but from his best friend, and he intended to file for divorce. The lawyer was convinced that Christy had intended to kill her husband anyway. However, she used her brother's presence to shift the responsibility onto him. Christy was known for her manipulative nature, and so she simply got the student to make a much publicized confession with the help of her influence on her brother. Tyler Edmonds was a 13-year-old high school student with honors at the time of the murder. The young man was not violent and had never been associated with criminal activities. He showed no interest in gangs. Tyler had not once been noticed for antisocial behavior. The teenager was a real role model, respected his elders, and regularly attended the local church. The young man had an active lifestyle, played sports, and was everyone's favorite. No one believed he could have been involved in a violent crime. The biggest problems for the defense only began later when the prosecution presented a video recording to the jurors in which Tyler confessed to the crime. In the video, the young man clearly said that he had actually helped Christy kill her husband. The jurors were shown the video of the teenager's confession, but not the entire video. The moment when the sister entered the room and essentially forced her brother to confess was not shown. This became a major obstacle to proving his innocence. To refute the prosecution's argument, the defense had to convince the jurors that this eloquent statement was false and made under duress. For this purpose, the defense should have called in an expert on facial expressions and gestures, the very person the defender had relied on when developing his tactics. Unfortunately, the judge prohibited the statement of this expert, which severely shook confidence in the victory. Thereupon, the defender changed direction and decided to focus on the discrepancies in the man's statements. In fact, there were several suspicious moments in his confession. First, he reported that he had seen a whole fountain of blood after the shot. According to an independent judicial expert, however, There could not have been a fountain of blood when he was hit in the head. Such a wound does not bleed immediately, and there could have been no blood splatter. In fact, the deceased was only shot once with a .22 caliber rifle, resulting in a single entry wound, and the skull remained intact. The young man had obviously made it all up. All this resembled a childish fantasy. The real picture was unknown to the teenager because he was not in Joe's bedroom at the time of the execution. The fact that the judge allowed the use of videos denying his confession during the retrial also played into Dirt's hands. These had not been shown to the jurors at the previous hearing. In his counterstatement, the convicted man gave the police a different version of events, which differed significantly from his confession. According to him, Joey, Tyler, and CHR were on a short trip early on the morning of the murder day to meet the student's father. The young man sat in the car when he heard a suspicious noise in the house. However, he did not bother to check what had happened. Christy left the house very quickly. They made the trip, and on the way back, the sister confessed to the murder of her spouse. Moreover, Christy immediately began asking her brother to take part of the blame for the massacre. She believed this would help her escape the death penalty. Her sister was completely indifferent to the fate of Tyler, who had not even finished school. Tyler agreed because he wanted to help her and protect Christy. On October 31, 2008, the last day of Tyler's retrial arrived. The outcome depended on which version of the defendant's words the jurors believed. The defendant was to present his defense that day. He admitted that he had pleaded guilty because Christy had convinced him that the teenager would not go to prison. At the same time, she believed that her brother's confession would enable her to escape the death penalty and save her life. According to the teenager, they agreed that Christy would signal him to take the blame for the act, but they did not discuss what the signal would look like. He received it as CHR entered the interrogation room after the murder and sat next to him. She took the young man's hand and gave the signal. But the brother did not take full blame as Christy wanted. When asked about their joint involvement in the case, Christy, as it turned out before she gave the signal in the next room during the interrogation, initially claimed there had been an accident in which her husband was seriously injured and killed. However, under police pressure, she gave in. She decided, however, to drag her brother down with her. After the closing arguments of the prosecution, the defender also gave a closing statement. In his opinion, the prosecution had really no evidence besides the confession of the 13-year-old child that directly linked him to the murder. At the same time, the defender doubted that the words of the child, who was obviously under pressure, could be taken seriously. The wait for the verdict of the jurors seemed to last an eternity. When the jurors returned, the men and women declared that the 19-year-old Tyler was innocent. After 5 years in prison, the wrongfully convicted young man was finally free. For the family of the deceased, however, the question of justice remained open. Joey's parents just wanted to know the truth. They were no longer interested in revenge or in punishing someone for a murder. All the mother and father wanted to know was what exactly happened on that fateful day. After his release from prison, Tyler returned to his normal life. He completed college and earned a medical degree. The young man made sure to obtain a higher education in the chosen profession. Afterward, the young man left Mississippi and moved to Florida, where no one knew him, and lives there to this day. In many interviews, the wrongfully convicted admitted that the consequences of the false accusations still haunt him. It is impossible to forget the 5.5 years in prison that ruined his life, but he could get used to normal life. After the incident, Tyler concluded that police officers should not only make video recordings during a limited period of interaction with suspects when it suits them but continuously so that all details are visible. Moreover, children should only speak to the police in the presence of a parent and a lawyer so that they are not pressured. In many states, children can only speak to police officers in the presence of their parents. However, this is not an effective measure to protect teenagers, for not all parents are familiar with the criminal code and their rights. There are many cases where these basic, seemingly self-evident rules are not followed. Therefore, involving a lawyer is quite an appropriate measure. After the retrial and acquittal of Tyler, prosecutors became interested in the activities of the forensic scientist Stephen Henn, who insisted that he had determined from the trajectory of the bullet how many people were holding the rifle. This publicity-grabbing statement called into question the competence and objectivity of the specialist. Other cases in which he had appeared as an expert were analyzed. It turned out that in at least 2 controversial cases, the decision had also been based on the questionable conclusions of the expert. As a result, in 2008, 2 more men were released. This happened after receiving DNA material found on the victim's body. After careful analysis, it was confirmed that it did not match the profiles of the 2 convicted men. The miscarriage of justice was finally confirmed after the real murderer confessed, which once again confirmed the incompetence of this expert. He was eventually dismissed from the proceedings. As for Christie, after the first trial, she was sentenced to only 12 years in prison for complicity. While serving this sentence, the criminal used her talent for manipulation to convince 2 cellmates to help her escape. However, the plan failed. In 2008, she found herself in a retrial for the murder of Joey Fulgham due to her brother's acquittal. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. The lawyer filed an appeal in 2010, and after a new trial, the death sentence was overturned. She was sentenced to life imprisonment. Afterward, Christie wrote an apology letter to her half-brother. It was actually just a short note that said, "I'm sorry, you know why?" Of course, this cynical letter only made the young man angry. He had lost almost 6 years of his life to a sentence for a crime he had not committed because of his sister, and she did not even have the courage or the right words to write a proper letter. Tyler has completely cut off his relationship with his half-sister. He is sure that she only got close to him because she wanted to use him in some way for her own selfish purposes. Of course, no one could have suspected at the time that this would land the young man behind bars. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourself. Nathan Joseph Villagomez Pete was born on February 12, 1982, in the village of Tamuning on the west coast of the island of Guam, which belongs to the United States of America. Tamuning is the economic center of Guam, the largest paradise island in Micronesia, located in the Pacific Ocean. The island is quite small, and the population does not exceed 170,000. The main source of income for the island is tourism, with many people flying there each year to enjoy the clean beaches and visit the historical sites preserved from the Spanish colonial era. Nathan belonged to a large and loving family. He was the 4th child, and in total, there were 5 children: Matthew, Anthony, Eric, Nathan himself, and Selah. Their parents were Carmelita Villagomez and Mateo Pete. From birth, Nathan was a wonderful child who never caused any trouble. He grew up loving and kind, was a good student, and very curious. Nathan always respected his teachers, usually sat in the front row, and never missed a lesson. Nathan was a typical islander. From a young age, he was inseparably connected to the sea, spending time on the beach, surfing, or just enjoying the sun. As Nathan grew older, he became more popular, people loved him, and he managed to build a large circle of friends in his hometown. Nathan was known for his sense of humor, always laughed contagiously, and showed with every cell of his body how much he loved life. After finishing elementary school, Nathan attended South High School in the neighboring town of Santa Rita, where he met Michelle and Chaka, a girl who had 3 siblings, Melissa, Melania, and Anthony Chacker. This family was also friendly and loving. After meeting as teenagers, Nathan and Michelle never separated again, They studied together, supported each other in everything, and it was not surprising that their friendship eventually turned into a love relationship. When Michelle was 16, her mother fell seriously ill and Deborah was flown off the island, but unfortunately, she could not be saved. The woman died far from her family, and her children could not say goodbye to her. Facing the unexpected death of their mother, Michelle's older sister Melissa took on the role of mother and helped raise her siblings. From day one, Michelle was a great support and very helpful around the house and with the upbringing of the young ones. During this process, Nathan was always by the side of his beloved girl. In 2000, after they both completed their studies, Nathan proposed to her. Since they had no money for a wedding, they decided to just move in together and start a life together. They were so in love that they couldn't wait to start building their own house. At that time, Nathan worked as a receptionist in a hotel, but with his salary, they could not cover all expenses in a month, and they were about to give birth to their first child, whom they later named Duh. Now that he was a father, he wanted to provide his family with everything they needed. This desire eventually led to Nathan's decision to become a soldier and join the Air Force. Nathan completed his training in 2003 and was immediately sent to Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage, the most populous city in Alaska, in the northwest of the United States. Nathan left his home island, but now the family had a lot of money, which allowed him to build a new house where their second child, a daughter named Niara, was born in 2006. 6 years after their engagement, Michelle and Nathan could finally celebrate the wedding they had dreamed of for so long. That same year, Nathan was transferred to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, where he served as team leader of the weapons team for the A-10 Thunderbolt and the 358th Squadron. There he also received training in logistics and material management, which led to a promotion and new tasks in 2007. At the end of 2007, Nathan moved with his wife and their 2 children to Nellis Air Force Base near Las Vegas, Nevada. At this base, he rose from Staff Chief of the 99th Logistics Squadron to Deputy Non-Commissioned Officer in charge of the Supply Department for maintaining fighter jets. Soon, the family had 2 more children, first Dran and then Devon. In 2009, Michelle considered Las Vegas the perfect place to stay and raise their children there permanently. For this reason, Nathan used his savings to make a down payment on a beautiful 730 square meter house in a quiet and pleasant suburb about 50 kilometers from the Air Regiment. At that time, Michelle was only a housewife, and the income of Sergeant Naon was not enough to provide the family with a luxurious life, although they could cover all expenses. The two were ambitious and over time spent more than they earned, which soon led to financial difficulties that severely affected their marital happiness. In mid-2009, Nathan decided to participate in the war between the USA and Iraq. Originally, the young man was supposed to spend only 6 months there, but eventually, he decided to continue his service after realizing that he was benefiting his country and his salary was significantly higher. Michelle, in turn, took a part-time job at a credit card telemarketing company during this time. Michelle did this not only to have more money but also to alleviate her anxiety about the fact that her husband was in a war zone and something terrible could happen to him at any moment, leaving her and their 4 children on their own. In addition to her new job, Michelle enrolled in a cosmetics school, hoping to become a professional beautician and open her own business. But as soon as Nathan left for Iraq, Michelle had a secret lover. She felt that the youthful love between her and her husband was no longer there and entered into a relationship with a colleague named Michael Rudolph Rodriguez. He was 31 years old at the time and had short prison sentences in 2007 and 2008 for forgery and attempted theft. He was an incorrigible womanizer who loved to seduce women, for which he even received the nickname Soft Rick. Michelle could not resist the passion and male attention of this man and plunged headlong into this dangerous relationship. When Nathan returned from Iraq at the end of 2009, It seemed as if their marriage had withstood the distance and their togetherness had become even stronger. However, this was not the case. Michelle played the role of the loving wife in a despicable way and dreamed of starting a new life with her lover. At the same time, Nathan knew nothing about his wife's infidelity and devoted himself entirely to the well-being of the family. For this reason, the 20-year-old non-commissioned officer took a night shift job to earn twice as much and provide for his wife and the 4 children, who were then between 2 and 9 years old. At the same time, the man began coaching a team of children aged 5 to 7, teaching them a simplified version of the sport of baseball. Although Michelle no longer wanted to be with Nathan, she did not try to leave him. She knew that in the event of a divorce, she would be left with nothing, and she also knew that in the event of her husband's death, she would receive $400,000 from the U.S. Army. Moreover, Nathan's life was insured under a policy for $250,000, and this knowledge led Michelle to the terrible plan to take her husband's life. In October 2010, Michelle and her lover began developing a strategy to execute their plan. At that time, they enlisted the help of Corey Alexis Hawkins, a friend of Michael's, a 30-year-old contract killer with 9 previous convictions in his criminal record. These convictions included burglary and auto theft in 1995, serious theft in 1996, deadly burglary in 2000, and fraudulent use of a credit card in 2000. Corey was an experienced criminal and offered his services as a contract killer to Michelle and Michael, for which he demanded $20,000, and the couple agreed. Later, Corey's girlfriend, the 30-year-old Jessica, joined the plan. The planned murder was to shoot Nathan in his Chevy Tahoe and then drive the car with the body to the parking lot of the apartment complex, cover the car with a blanket, and bury the body. Jessica set out to buy the special items they needed to execute the crime, including men's gloves, a blanket for the car, and a strong perfume to cover the smell of the decomposing body. The next step was to find an alibi for Michael. For this purpose, she approached her friend Shannon, a former erotic actress, to ask her to testify in court to corroborate the criminal's statements about Michael's whereabouts on the day of the crime. In return, Jessica promised Shannon 5% of the money that she and her boyfriend would receive from Michael. On Thanksgiving Day in November 2010, Nathan and his family were visited by his brother Eric and his fiancée Veronica. On that day, the guests sensed the tensions between the couple, which until then had been considered perfect. For Veronica and Eric, it was quite obvious that the love and understanding between Michelle and Nathan had completely disappeared. They barely tolerated each other and obviously had financial problems since their pantry and refrigerator were almost empty. It was Wednesday, December 1, 2010. Michelle went to her cosmetics school after work, from where she came home at 10 p.m., only 5 minutes before Nathan was supposed to leave for the Air Force Base. But that day, everything was a little different. Michelle reported that she was not feeling well, so she left work and went straight home around 5:30 p.m. When she got home, she saw her husband sleeping on the couch. Michelle woke Nathan up and suggested that they sleep together in bed for a while, which they did. For some reason, Nathan's alarm clock did not ring, and he only woke up at 11 p.m., shocked. He immediately went to take a shower and then to the garage to put on his uniform. When he was done with his preparations, it was 11:30 p.m., and he should have been halfway to work by then. At about the same time, Michelle texted her lover to inform him about everything her husband was doing. They decided to carry out their plan that same day. At that time, Michael and Corey were sitting in a black Cadillac parked directly in front of their future victim's house, waiting for Nathan. The perpetrators were already wearing blue latex gloves on their hands so that their fingerprints could not be traced. Finally, Nathan said goodbye to his family and prepared to leave the garage. At the same moment, Michelle texted Michael about the completion of a planned deal with a client named F. Dyke, which was obviously a code name. While Nathan was still in the garage, Michael approached him from behind and shot him 5 times in the back. Although the man was mortally wounded, he found the strength to enter the house, but as soon as he did, he fell dead in front of his wife and children, who were very frightened by the sound of the shots and the fact that their father was bleeding to death in front of their eyes. Michelle immediately called emergency services, screaming that her husband was bleeding to death. The paramedic instructed the woman on how to revive Nathan, but it was too late for him. Nathan was immediately taken to the hospital, where the doctors did everything in their power to save him, but unfortunately, the man was unable to survive his injuries. The most severe wound was caused by a bullet that hit him in the neck. Michelle was hysterical as her husband was taken to the hospital and looked completely devastated when she learned of his death. Of course, it was all just an act, because just a few hours later, she sent her lover a text message with a smiling smiley face. The perpetrators, in turn, went to a previously agreed-upon apartment after the attack, where they used the fireplace to burn their clothes and destroy the evidence. Michael then went with Shannon to a hotel to confirm his alibi, while Jessica, in the meantime, thoroughly cleaned the room to destroy all the evidence. The employees of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department were shocked by the brutality of the crime that had occurred in a quiet suburb. When investigator Todd Williams arrived at the scene, he found that the garage doors were not locked. There was a lot of blood inside, with stains around the bench where Nathan had put on his shoes, as well as on several doors of his car, on the floor, and on the walls of the garage. Moreover, a bloody military uniform was found on the floor near the spot where the victim's keys and wallet were found. All this ruled out the idea of a botched robbery. Michelle was then asked to tell what had happened that day. The woman told the investigator that she had heard loud noises when her husband rushed into the garage. At that time, she did not realize what had happened because she and her children were frightened. A little later, a stumbling Nathan entered the house and collapsed in front of them, bleeding. During the conversation, Michelle admitted that they were in financial difficulties, so the investigators wondered whether Nathan was hiding a secret, such as a gambling addiction, the threat of an extortionist, or an affair with another woman, which could explain why someone would want to take the life of a model soldier. Eventually, the evidence suggested that someone had waited for the right moment before he went to work. It did not look like a random robbery. An examination of the man's phone, however, revealed no clues or evidence. All that could be found on the phone were pictures of his wife and children. In Guam, his parents boarded the first flight out of Las Vegas, full of grief. Carmelita cried throughout the flight. When they finally reached the city, Michelle threw herself into the arms of her mother-in-law and fainted, but the woman immediately sensed that her reaction was fake. Meanwhile, the two men continued to destroy possible evidence. They destroyed the phones of all those involved in the crime, including Shannon, and reminded her that she had to confirm Michael's alibi in court. The investigation continued, and the investigators questioned neighbors who had been nearby at the time of the crime. Several of them reported that they had seen a man in a brown hoodie quickly leaving the scene of the crime in a black car after the shots were fired. When the investigators asked Michelle about the car, she suddenly mentioned that her colleague Michael had a similar car. The police decided to pay attention to this and looked into Michael's file, finding out that he had an extensive criminal past. This made the police suspicious, so they invited the man for questioning. Michael agreed and answered all the questions there. He told a story that he had come up with his accomplices. Allegedly, he had gone shopping at the supermarket that day and had met a woman named Shannon around 9 p.m. According to Michael's statements, they talked for a long time, and when they felt attracted to each other, they decided to go to a hotel to have sex. The man added that they arrived at the hotel around 11 p.m., and the woman later confirmed his statements. However, the investigators felt that something was not right here, so they examined the data from Michael's and Michelle's phones and found their correspondence, which they had also been leading for a year. In a report from the phone company, they were able to find exactly the messages they had exchanged on the evening of the tragedy. Michael wrote that he hoped for a quick conclusion of the contract with Van Dyke, which was supposed to take place the next day. 2 minutes later, the man added that she should let him know if she could take a few days off and that he appreciated her help in concluding the contract. At 11:19 p.m., Michelle replied to the message, saying that her husband had just woken her up and that they had apparently overslept his alarm clock. She added that the man had run out the door and would be leaving the house shortly, then added laughing that he would probably be late for work. Then Michelle wrote that she was sorry that Michael had been so involved in her responsibility. However, they did not have enough evidence to charge Michael or Michelle and had to let the man go. Michelle was then summoned for questioning again. Under the insight and pressure of the investigator, the woman broke down and revealed her secret affair with Michael. According to the woman, Michael had started planning 2 months before the crime to take Nathan's life so that she could receive a high payout from her husband's insurance policy and start a life together. Michelle said that she initially agreed to carry out the plan, but later changed her mind and tried to prevent the execution of the bloody plan. Therefore, she did not open the car in the garage as Michael had asked her to and also turned off Nathan's alarm clock, hoping that the criminals would be gone by the time they woke up. The investigators did not believe the woman's remorse. The correspondence clearly indicated that she had been actively involved in the plan. Later, new evidence confused the case. On December 7, Shannon appeared at the police station and revealed that Michael had forced her to give him an alibi for the night of the shooting. The woman stated that her friend Jessica had asked her to help 2 men she knew rob a dealer of illegal substances and that she would help cover up their involvement. In return, Jessica offered her 5% of Michael's profit. Shannon assured her, however, that she had agreed to help them because she thought the victim was a dangerous criminal. Shannon then revealed that she had met Michael at her friend's apartment on the night after the events that led to Nathan's death. When they arrived there, Michael confessed to her that he had shot his victim. When the two returned to the friend's apartment the next day, where they had met the day before, the woman noticed a strong smell of cleaning products and saw that the fireplace was completely clean and all 3 phones had been destroyed. Shannon assured the police that as soon as she found out what had happened, she immediately decided to confess everything to the authorities and added in tears that she was very afraid for her life after the confession. The police obtained footage from the hotel's surveillance camera, which showed that Michael and Shannon had arrived at the scene about 40 minutes after the crime. This confirmed the woman's statement, so the police decided to search the apartment of Corey, whom Shannon had identified as Michael's accomplice. They managed to obtain a search warrant. At about the same time, Jessica admitted to having bought latex gloves, a car cover, and an air freshener, all items they wanted to use in the attack. Simultaneously with the investigations, on Tuesday, December 7, 2010, the family and friends of his wife gathered in the chapel at the Air Force Base to honor and appreciate the sergeant. Colonel Sean Henderson, Nathan's squadron commander, praised the young airman's service to the Air Force and spoke of the merits the man had brought to his country. Nathan's other comrades praised his high work ethic, motivation, passion, and dedication. His learning ability and commitment to his profession also characterized him as a modest man who was a role model and inspired his colleagues. Eric, Nathan's brother, spoke of the love and unconditional support that Nathan had shown him throughout his life. With tears in his eyes, he said that he knew no one or could imagine anyone who would not want to be friends with Nathan and that he was a man who loved life and surfing. Eric added that Nathan had never forgotten his roots and was proud of his service to his country, was a good person who liked to have fun, and simply loved his wife and 4 children. The next day, on December 8, Michael Rodriguez, Corey Hawkins, and Jessica Austin were arrested on charges of murder with a firearm and conspiracy to murder and robbery without bail and taken to the Clark County Detention Center in Nevada. The next day, Michelle was also arrested under the same conditions and placed under observation to prevent her from committing suicide. On the same day Michelle was arrested, December 9, Nathan's body was transferred to Guam and buried there. Only his family and an honor guard from the Air Force Base attended the ceremony. On Wednesday, December 15, 2010, a funeral mass was held at the Church of St. Francis in Tamianing, where Nathan's family, friends, and colleagues said goodbye to him. Subsequently, military honors were bestowed upon him at the Veterans Cemetery in Petiguam. Nathan's motorcade consisted of motorcycles. Upon arrival, 6 officers carried the coffin, covered with the flag of the United States of America, from the hearse and brought it to Nathan's final resting place. Family and friends surrounded him to say their final goodbye, and just before the funeral, a salute was fired. Just over a month after Nathan's death, on Tuesday, January 4, 2011, charges of conspiracy to commit murder and robbery with a firearm, as well as murder with a firearm, were brought against the 4 defendants in Clark County District Court. Charges of possession of a firearm were additionally brought against 2 men. Each of the defendants denied involvement in the crime and assembled their own defense teams. Over the next 3 years, several trial dates were scheduled, which, however, were postponed for various reasons. Michelle's lawyer, Christina Weed, filed various motions, one of which aimed to exclude evidence related to the woman's phone on the grounds that the analysis of the phone had been conducted without a search warrant. According to court documents, some of the evidence on the phones was lost, but the police officers kept their own records of this evidence. On this basis, the defense attorney also requested that these pieces of evidence be removed from the proceedings due to lack of evidence preservation or destruction. However, all these motions were denied, and the trial was scheduled for September 2015. At the same time, Jessica Austin reached a deal with the prosecution after she was found guilty of conspiracy to murder. The trial finally took place on September 21, 2015. Michael Rudolph Rodriguez was the first of the defendants to stand trial. The prosecutor told the jurors in detail that Michael had shot Nathan while he was on his way to work. J. Manson Bauman said he had been walking his dog that night and initially, everything had been very quiet when suddenly 5 shots rang out. Just a few seconds after the shots, he saw a black Cadillac speeding away from the scene. In the end, Michael pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. On September 29, 2015, the man was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He was also denied the right to appeal his sentence. During the sentencing, Michael looked straight ahead and showed no emotion as he learned of his sentence. A month later, the trial against Michelle took place in a court in Las Vegas. During the questioning, the defense attorney asked Michelle whether she had known that Michael Rodriguez was going to take her husband's life that night. The woman denied this and stated that Michael had forced her to do what led to Nathan's death and that the entire plan had gotten out of control. Prosecutor Michelle Fleck later rejected the defendant's defense, saying that the syndrome of the lonely and bored wife was no excuse for her actions. When Michelle was allowed to say a few words during the trial, the woman turned to Nathan's parents in tears, apologized to them, said that she loved him and their children, and then fainted. Michelle then pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder with a firearm. Through this confession, Michelle, like Michael, was able to avoid the death penalty. The victim's family also asked the court to waive the death penalty for Michelle. In her closing argument, the judge described the crime as incomprehensible and unbelievable and stated that she could not believe that Michelle continued to sleep next to her husband even though she knew he was exposed to an imminent and unnecessary death. The judge also noted that she did not believe Michelle had tried to sabotage the plan and found that much evidence suggested that the woman was far more involved than she was willing to admit. In October 2015, it was Corey Alexis Hawkins' turn. He also agreed to a deal to avoid the death penalty. His lawyer, Andrea L., asked for leniency to give his client a chance for parole one day. The judge denied the request because he was convinced that Corey had participated in planning the crime and was in close proximity when the murderer pulled the trigger. When the final judgment in the case against Michelle was pronounced in March 2016, the woman made several statements. For example, she stated that she was emotionally vulnerable at the time of the events, which led to major irreparable mistakes. She also expressed, in tears, her hope that everyone would be able to forgive her one day. Nathan's mother, Camelida, who had become the guardian of her 4 grandchildren, also had the opportunity to speak during the trial. She told her daughter-in-law that she had forgiven her because she was a religious woman and could see that Michelle's soul needed this. Camelida then spoke about the effects that Michelle's actions and Nathan's death had had on her children. Camelida said that despite therapy, the children still got scared when they heard loud noises and feared that their mother might do something to them, just as she had done to their father. Nathan's mother concluded her speech by asking the judge to sentence Michelle to life imprisonment without parole. Eric also commented on the sentencing of his sister-in-law, saying that they did not wish her death. He said it was enough for them that Michelle knew they would all live without her and that her children would grow up knowing what their mother had done. Eric's wife, Veronica, told Michelle that she hated her but that she simply did not deserve to spend another day outside and added that she did not deserve the last name Pete. Michelle was eventually sentenced to life imprisonment at the Floresmore Women's Correctional Facility in Las Vegas. Corey's sentence of life imprisonment without parole was confirmed a few months later, on September 20, 2016, in Las Vegas. Michelle had completely destroyed her life full of love by chasing after greed and a man she barely knew. 4 children lost their father, and a war veteran died just because his wife forgot that the youthful love she had had since high school was something truly beautiful and unique. Now, Michelle and Nathan's 4 children are growing up in the love and care of their paternal grandparents in their father's hometown in Guam. But their lives have also been profoundly affected by their mother's actions. This truly cruel act has destroyed many lives. The innocent Nathan, who had always done his best for his family, died at the hands of his wife's lover, and now their children are forever traumatized by what happened to them. It was incredibly lucky that all the criminals were convicted and had no claim to the money that would have been due to them after Nathan's death. Now the criminals will never leave prison and will be in a place where they actually belong. Thank you for watching and take care of yourself. On January 17, 2014, officers entered the house of 52-year-old Harold Sasko and discovered his bloody body. During the investigation, it turned out that an 18-year-old girl was living with him, who everyone thought was his stepdaughter, but she was not at the scene. When the officers found out what had happened in that house, the entire community was in shock. Sarah McLynn was born on July 9, 1994. She grew up in Topeka, the capital of Kansas in the USA. For several years of her upbringing, she did not attend school and was homeschooled. Sarah grew up as a naive and shy child, but at the same time very friendly and attentive. She had a younger brother whom she always took care of and an older sister with whom she was very close. When Sarah was still a child, a neighbor began to abuse her, leading to severe trauma that affected her life. The girl started having nightmares in which she relived the violence and woke up in the middle of the night in panic. Stress and fear did not allow her to live in peace. Then Sarah started running away and drinking alcohol. Because of this, her parents decided to take her to a psychologist to help her process the trauma. However, the situation did not improve, and things at home got worse. Around this time, her parents divorced, which had a significant impact on her. According to Sarah, her parents' divorce made her feel unloved at home. Over time, she completely lost contact with her father, and her relationship with her mother became increasingly conflict-ridden. Sarah felt out of place at home and wanted to leave as soon as possible. She apparently needed a job to leave home. At the age of 14, Sarah started working in a pizzeria. The owner of this establishment was a middle-aged man named Harold Saska. At first glance, Harold was a successful and upright person. At that time, he owned 3 pizzerias and was a devout Christian. But his employees had a different version. They said Harold was a pervert. One of Terry David's employees, the manager of one of the establishments, said Harold asked him to hire only young, attractive girls. Apparently, Terry didn't like this, and every time he hired a girl, he warned her to be cautious of her boss. But when Sarah was hired and received this warning from Terry, she was very naive and concluded that the guy was exaggerating. When the girl started working at the pizzeria, Harold began communicating with her and gradually gained her trust. He even picked her up from school, drove her to work, bought her things, asked her to tell him what was happening, and even told her to see him as a father. But he also told her not to tell her mother about what was happening. So Sarah listened to him, and her family never found out about this relationship. Parallel to her relationship with Harold, whom she began to see as a father, Sarah experienced another rape at the age of 16, this time by a close friend. According to the girl, they were relaxing when her friend pushed her onto a table, the table broke, and he raped her and even burned her back with a cigarette. All of this obviously affected Sarah, who, thanks to psychotherapy, had already managed to cope with the violence she had been exposed to as a child. But with this new episode, the ghosts of the past returned to her life. Sarah returned to psychotherapy, and this time she was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. Stress and depression increased to the point that the teenager attempted suicide. Sarah was then hospitalized in a psychiatric clinic for some time, where she received therapy and medication for rehabilitation. When Sarah left the hospital, she continued to take medication and see a psychologist. It began to help her cope with everything she had gone through. However, the situation at home was very tense, and she couldn't stand the atmosphere there. When the girl was hospitalized, she no longer worked at Harold's pizzeria, but they stayed in touch. He picked her up from school, took her to lunch, and asked about her life. A 50-year-old man saw an opportunity when Sarah was very vulnerable and decided to take advantage of it. During this time in Sarah's life, Harold repeatedly suggested she move in with him. He was single, had no children or obligations, and lived alone. Besides, his business was going very well, and he told the girl that he could help her financially. Harold even offered to finance her education. But Sarah repeatedly refused. She didn't want to move in with Harold, even though she desperately wanted to leave home because the arguments with her mother were daily and often very intense. Finally, in 2012, when she graduated from school and turned 17, Sarah accepted Harold's offer and moved in with him. Then it seemed to her that this was the beginning of a new life and that with this person she would have everything she needed. And indeed, Harold was initially like that. He bought Sarah everything she needed, enrolled her in college, provided her with food, a roof over her head, and asked for nothing in return. He bought her gifts and was very attentive to what she needed and wanted. But when Sarah turned 18, everything changed. At that point, Harold began making inappropriate propositions to her. He invited Sarah to have sex in return for everything he did for her, which she obviously refused. In the months she lived with Harold, they pretended to be stepfather and stepdaughter to avoid misunderstandings and misinterpretations of their relationship. Sarah never thought this man would ask her to have sex with him. According to the girl's mother, she was never okay with her daughter moving in with Harold, but Sarah never listened to her. Several people close to Harold and Sarah said she even called him Dad, and the fact that he asked her for intimacy surprised them greatly. When Sarah refused, the man became very angry. He hinted that there would be no home for her if she didn't have sex with him. Harold also knew that Sarah had problems in the past and had already started consuming alcohol and illegal substances at a very young age. The man took advantage of this and offered her various forbidden substances. When Sarah was under the influence of drugs, Harold tried to have sex with her and even raped her several times. Every time the girl refused, the man became angrier, more aggressive, and crueler towards her. Then Harold wrote Sarah a list of all the things he had bought her and explained that she couldn't leave the house until she repaid all the money. He manipulated her by threatening to sue her for not paying her debts if she tried to run away. By this time, Sarah had a steady job, but Harold withheld her pay, and her income wasn't enough to cover everything Harold demanded. The expenses included 2 expensive cosmetic surgeries that Sarah underwent at Harold's urging. One was a nose job, and the other was buttock implants. The second surgery caused her such pain that she took medication for several months. For these 2 surgeries, Harold demanded $16,000 from Sarah. In addition to all these payments for gifts, the man also demanded payment from the girl for the months she lived in his house. Sarah couldn't return home to her mother because Harold subjected her to psychological violence and manipulated her by saying that no one needed her at home and that she would definitely not be accepted there. Her behavior completely changed from a quiet, naive girl with a very good heart to a very aggressive girl who didn't want to talk to anyone and defended herself at the slightest remark. According to Sarah, over time, her thoughts changed, and she began to feel the desire to kill. First, she went to a pet store and bought rabbits. When she got home, she killed them with a knife, skinned them, and then ate them. Harold witnessed all of this but said nothing to her. Moreover, he laughed at her. When Sarah wasn't at work, she was always under the influence of illegal substances, alcohol, or in a very bad mood because of everything she had gone through at Harold's house. Eventually, Sarah started taking antidepressants because she thought they might help her. Weeks passed, and they had no effect, so she switched to stronger ones, but they didn't help either. This plunged the girl into a spiral of self-destruction, and it was only a matter of time before something terrible happened in that house. On January 17, 2014, police officers arrived at Harold's house. His colleagues reported him missing after he didn't show up at the pizzeria for several days and couldn't be reached. The officers rang the doorbell several times, but no one answered. Then they decided to look through the windows to see if there was anything inside. One of them managed to see a man's body in a pool of blood, and the officers broke down the door to enter the house. When they entered, they found several empty beer cans next to Harold's body. Harold's body was taken to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy, and it was determined that he died from multiple stab wounds to the neck. Additionally, an analysis of the beer cans was conducted, and traces of sleeping pills were found in them. The police knew that Sarah lived with Harold in the house, and when they arrived, they found her phone and, knowing her age, concluded that she was missing. They thought someone might have taken the girl against her will. Later, the officers learned that Sarah had called work and said she would be absent for several days due to the death of a relative. They spoke with the girl's family, and her mother said that Sarah had tried to contact her grandmother. The police traced the calls and found that they had been made from different grocery stores. After investigating where these stores were located, they concluded that Sarah was traveling from Kansas to Texas. They also checked the surveillance footage of the stores and found that it was indeed Sarah who called and that she was alone. At that moment, it became clear to them that she had not been kidnapped and she became the main suspect in Harold's murder. On January 25, 2014, 11 days after the murder, the 19-year-old Sarah was found sleeping in Harold's car by a park ranger. This happened around 1:30 a.m. in Everglades National Park. When they woke her up to arrest her, they found that she had a loaded weapon. A search of the car revealed another gun, illegal substances, an axe, and 2 knives. At the time of her arrest, Sarah was not taken to Kansas but left in Florida, where she was interrogated by several investigators. The girl did not resist and did not try to make up a story. She quickly admitted that she had indeed killed Harold and fled the scene. Sarah said that this man had been harassing her and that she saw this as the only way to get rid of him. The girl told everything in detail. According to her, a few days before the incident, when Harold was not home, she went to the pharmacy and bought a pack of sleeping pills. On January 14th, the day before the man's body was discovered, she had a day off. Harold started renovating the house and asked Sarah to bring him a beer. The girl said that at that moment she realized this was her chance. She knew that Harold would not only drink beer but would also want more. After the 3rd can of beer, Sarah started mixing the pills into Harold's drink. She said she waited until the 3rd can so he wouldn't notice the strange taste. While Harold asked for more beer, she continued giving him the pills, totaling 5. This medication, combined with alcohol, caused Harold to lose consciousness. Then, Sarah quickly tied his hands and feet. According to her, Harold woke up at some point for about a minute and mumbled something. Sarah didn't understand him well but said she felt very sorry for him at that moment but was determined to carry out her plan. She took out a knife and stabbed him several times in the neck, almost decapitating him. When the girl realized that Harold was dead, she took his blood and wrote the word freedom on the bathroom wall. Then, Sarah washed her hands, took a shower, changed clothes, and took money, a tablet, and Harold's car and left the house. She said she left her phone behind so it couldn't be tracked and believed that something had happened to her as well. The girl drove towards Texas, but when she arrived, she didn't like it there because it was too cold at night, so she drove to Florida. Along the way, Sarah mostly slept in the car and stopped on the highway to rest. When she arrived in Florida, she contacted a local tattoo artist, James Baker, to get a tattoo. This wasn't Sarah's first tattoo. She already had the phrase "Only God can judge me" on her shoulder. For her second tattoo, Sarah chose a quote from a book, "Beware of the dark pit at the bottom of our hearts. In its icy black depths live strange, perverse creatures that are best left alone." Sarah hoped that by cooperating with the police and telling the whole story of Harold's violence, they would be lenient and reduce her sentence. However, the police decided not to do so. They portrayed Sarah as a real psychopath and Harold as a calm Catholic who only wanted to help the girl. During the interrogation, Sarah told one of the officers that during the fits of rage she experienced in Harold's house, she felt the urge to kill. Therefore, the prosecutors claimed that Sarah killed Harold because she wanted to know what it felt like to kill a man and not because he was cruel to her. The police also found a message on Sarah's phone in which Harold apologized to her for forcing her to have sex with him, but none of this was shown to the jury in the first trial. All evidence of Harold's abuse of Sarah was ignored to bring the girl to trial. In February 2014, the trial against Sarah began. The lawyer did not want to use all of Harold's abuses against the girl as they were not considered in the indictment. He decided to try another risky strategy. The man suggested to Sarah to prove her innocence due to a mental illness, claiming she suffered from dissociative identity disorder. According to Sarah, the lawyer told her that she would be released this way. According to the defense, Sarah developed several alter egos to cope with the abuse she endured. One of these personalities was Vanessa, a fragile and vulnerable girl who was afraid of dying to escape Harold. But another personality named Lisa, who was very bad, decided to kill the man to prevent this. Then there was Mila, who had deep memories of abuse. The lawyer argued that all these personalities represented the so-called system and that the real Sarah disappeared when she was raped by a friend. Sarah expressed remorse for her actions and apologized to Harold's family, but her defense strategy was unsuccessful. Neither the judge nor the jury believed a single word. The prosecution had another carefully crafted story. They focused on the fact that Sarah killed Harold just to find out what it was like to kill a person. They stated that the sexual relations, despite Harold's pressure, were consensual and not part of the violence. Since the defense had already addressed the issue of trauma and what Sarah had experienced, the prosecution declared that all these episodes from the past were not true, not considering the fact that Sarah had undergone psychological treatment related to everything she had gone through. They continued to portray Harold as a calm religious man who only wanted to help a misguided teenager, whom she took advantage of. The prosecutors even stated that the illegal substances were not brought home by Harold but were bought by Sarah herself, although there was no evidence of this. The only thing they could prove 100% was that Sarah had already planned Harold's murder. When they checked her phone, they found several messages to her sister saying she had already found a way to get rid of this person forever. This made the prosecution clear to the judge that the crime was premeditated, and they therefore demanded a first-degree murder conviction. To further confirm this hypothesis, Sarah's browser history was checked, revealing that she had been researching the vulnerabilities of the neck and methods of attacking a person for a month. On September 4, 2015, 21-year-old Sarah was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 50 years. After the verdict, all information about Harold's abuse and the witnesses that the prosecution did not allow was made known to the media, and the case attracted great attention. It was found that most information about the conditions of the relationship between Sarah and Harold was hidden from the jury for unknown reasons, either to preserve Harold's image as a quiet religious man in the eyes of many or because the prosecution simply wanted to achieve the harshest possible punishment for the girl. However, in the end, all of this attracted more and more public attention. In 2021, Sarah made a deal with the prosecutor, which managed to reduce her sentence from 50 to 25 years. The girl is still sentenced to life imprisonment but can apply for release after 25 years.